The rain fell like needles against the black sky, drenching the dirt road that wound its way to the massive stone estate ahead. Isabella Moore pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to protect her from the cold. Each step felt heavier, her shoes sinking into the mud, her small suitcase soaked through. The rosary her mother had left her was warm in her trembling hand, its silver beads pressing into her palm like a fragile reminder of the faith she was trying so hard to keep. The iron gates creaked open with a sound that made her heart skip. Behind them stood the Cross estate, dark and silent, its tall windows glowing faintly from within. It looked more like a fortress than a home, a place built to keep the world out. Lightning flashed, revealing the grand archway, the carved gargoyles, and the balcony that jutted out like a watchful eye. A single lantern burned near the entrance. Beside it stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. His presence filled the air before he even spoke. His voice was deep, steady, and cold enough to slice through the storm. "You're late." Isabella froze. She had seen him only in photographs. The reclusive billionaire widower, Damien Cross. They said he hadn't been seen in public for years, that he'd lost his wife to a fall from the mansion's balcony and had never recovered. Some said he'd gone mad. Others said his grief had turned to bitterness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. The coach broke down. I walked the rest of the way. He looked at her for a long moment, his face half lit by the lantern. His eyes were dark, unreadable, as if they'd forgotten what softness meant. Without a word, he turned and opened the door, motioning her inside. The warmth hit her instantly, though it carried no comfort. The interior smelled of polished wood and something old, dust perhaps, or memories. Candles flickered along the walls, their light revealing portraits of people long dead. A grand staircase curled upward like a spine through the center of the house. On the table near the entrance lay a stack of papers. Damien walked to them, picked up a pen, and signed without looking up. The scratch of ink was the only sound in the vast hall. "The contract is complete," he said. "You're now Mrs. Cross." Isabella's heart sank. The words felt unreal. She had agreed to this, to save her sister's life, to pay for her treatment. She had sold her future for survival, but standing there, facing him, she realized she hadn't understood the price. Damien turned, his expression unreadable. "You'll stay in your room after dark," he said. "You'll take your meals alone until I decide otherwise, and you'll never enter the West Wing. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "Good." He started to leave, his footsteps echoing through the hall. But before disappearing into the shadows, he paused. "The maid will show you to your room," he said without turning around. "Rest. You'll need it." When he was gone, the silence pressed down like a weight. The maid appeared, a small, nervous woman with kind eyes, and led Isabella upstairs. Each step groaned underfoot, as if protesting her presence. Her room was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the gardens. Outside, the rain blurred everything into silver and black. She could see the far end of the mansion, the West Wing, its windows dark, all except one. A faint light flickered there, steady, then dim, then bright again. Isabella shivered. Maybe a servant had forgotten to extinguish it. Maybe not. She set her wet suitcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the storm. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. Somewhere deeper in the house, footsteps echo. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to the maid. Her fingers found the rosary again. She clutched it tight, whispering a prayer under her breath. But even as she prayed, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was listening, that something unseen was awake within its walls. And as the clock struck midnight, the faint light in the West Wing flickered once more, then went out. The next morning arrived heavy and gray. The storm had passed, but the sky still looked bruised. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth. Isabella woke before dawn, her body sore from the long walk. The day before, the faint sound of hooves echoed in the distance, followed by the low rumble of a carriage wheel. She went to the window. The fields stretched endlessly beyond the gates, and mist rolled like waves over the hills. The mansion behind her felt alive. Every wooden beam, every old painting seemed to breathe with her. She dressed in silence and stepped into the hallway. The house was vast and hollow. Only her footsteps broke the stillness. The walls were covered in portraits, all of them watching her. Some faces stern, some kind, but all faded by time. She stopped at one, a beautiful woman with dark hair and soft eyes wearing a silver pendant. Her expression calm, almost tender beneath the frame. A brass nameplate read, Margaret Cross, the first Mrs. Cross. Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard about her Damien's wife who died 5 years ago. No one knew what really happened. The newspapers said accident, but the villagers whispered words like madness, jealousy, even murder. A sound came from behind her. She turned sharply. The butler, Mr. Hale, stood there, tall, thin, his face polite, but distant. "Breakfast is ready, miss," he said quickly, correcting himself. "Madam," in the dining room, the long table was set for two, though only one side was used. Damien sat at the head of the table, reading a newspaper. His coffee untouched, his face calm, but his eyes sharp. He didn't greet her. He simply motioned to the chair across from him. She sat, hands trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the steaming cup before her. "Eat," he said without looking up. She obeyed, her stomach too tight for more than a few bites. Finally, she dared to speak. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said softly. "I will do my best to not be a burden." He folded the newspaper and looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. "This isn't charity," he said. "You're here because I paid for you." His voice was flat, not cruel, just a statement of fact. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I know." He stood suddenly, pushing the chair back. The sound echoed through the vast room. "Come with me." She followed him through a series of hallways, the air growing colder with every step. They stopped before a heavy oak door locked with an iron latch. "This," he said without turning to her, "is the West Wing. You'll never go beyond this point. Ever understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" He finally turned his face close enough for her to see the tension in his jaw. Because some doors should never be opened. He walked away, leaving her alone. The echo of his boots fading down the corridor. She stood staring at the door for a long time, her pulse racing. She could feel something behind it, not movement exactly, but a presence. It was as if the air there breathed differently, heavier, slower. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by the window. The moonlight cut through the mist, turning the garden silver. She could see the West Wing from here. One window at the far corner glowed faintly with light. Again, her breath caught. Someone was awake. The light flickered like a heartbeat, then vanished, leaving only the cold darkness behind. And in that silence, she could have sworn she heard something faint carried by the wind, a woman's voice singing a lullaby. Slow, sad, and far too real to be a dream. The morning light crept through the curtains, weak and pale, as if even the sun hesitated to touch this place. Isabella woke to the faint sound of footsteps above her, slow, deliberate, almost careful. She sat up, listening. The floorboards groaned once, then silence, the same kind of silence that feels alive. Her heart thudded in her chest. She told herself it was only the servants, but deep down she knew it wasn't. When she stepped into the hallway, the air was colder than before. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and started down the stairs. A maid passed by carrying a basket of linens. Her face, pale eyes fixed straight ahead. Isabella smiled politely, but the maid didn't return it. She only whispered under her breath. A prayer so low Isabella barely caught the words. God forgive him. In the kitchen she found a loaf of bread and some fruit left on the table. "Mr. Hale." The butler entered quietly, his gaze steady, though something about his calmness felt unnatural. He nodded toward the food. "Eat while you can, Miss Cross. The master won't be pleased if you faint in the stables today." "The stables?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "He wants you to learn your way around." Damien was already outside when she arrived, standing beside a black horse taller than any animal she had ever seen. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with faint scars. He looked nothing like the cruel image she'd built in her mind, more like a man who carried too much and refused to set it down. He looked at her once brief, sharp. "Get the saddle," he said. She hesitated. "I don't know how." "I never asked if you did," he replied. The words clipped, cold, but there was no true anger in his tone, only control. As she struggled with the leather straps, her fingers trembling, he moved behind her, close enough for her to feel his breath on her neck. His hand covered hers, firm, guiding the strap through the buckle. His voice dropped, "La." "Oh, we're softer," like it had forgotten how to be gentle. "You pull here, not there," he said. She froze, every nerve alive, his warmth against her back, the scent of rain and smoke clinging to him. Her heart raced, but she didn't move. When the saddle was secured, he stepped away, his voice calm again. "Good," he said. "Now go inside and stay out of the west wing." Before she could respond, thunder rolled in the distance, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. He turned to the horse, stroking its mane, the gesture tender, almost human. She realized he wasn't heartless. He was haunted. That night, the storm returned, wind howling through the chimneys, rain hitting the windows like fists. Isabella couldn't sleep again. She lay awake staring at the ceiling until a faint creak broke through the storm. Someone was walking down the hallway. She rose slowly, every instinct screaming not to move. She opened her door just enough to see the flicker of a candlelight passing by Damien's figure, tall, shadowed, moving toward the west wing. Without thinking, she followed, bare feet silent against the wooden floor. She stopped at the corner, watching him unlock the forbidden door. He stepped inside and closed it behind him. The faint sound of metal turning in a lock echoed down the hall. Isabella's heart pounded. She waited a few seconds, then crept closer, pressing her ear against the door. Faint sounds came from within, a voice whispering low, almost pleading. Then another voice, softer, fragile, broken, a woman's voice. Isabella stumbled back, breath catching in her throat. Lightning flashed through the window, casting her shadow across the wall. She ran back to her room and locked the door behind her, her chest rising and falling in rapid panic. Inside the west wing, the faint whispering continued, and above the storm, a woman began to hum the same lullaby Isabella had heard the night before. But now she was sure of one thing. It wasn't coming from a ghost, it was coming from someone alive. The morning came heavy with fog, wrapping the estate in a white curtain that swallowed the world. Isabella stood by her window, staring at the mist that crawled across the gardens. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the sound of that lullaby again and again, a living voice trapped behind a locked door. She tried to convince herself she had imagined it, but the memory was too sharp, too real. In the corridor outside her room, the floorboards groaned. She stepped out and nearly collided with Mr. Hale. He looked startled to see her awake so early. His eyes flicked toward the west wing, then back to her. "Good morning, Miss Cross," he said politely, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You should stay in your room till breakfast." His voice was calm, but there was something in it that sounded like warning. After he left, she walked down to the kitchen. The maids avoided her gaze, their whispers cutting off when she entered. It was as if an invisible rule hung in the air. No one spoke freely when she was near. She poured herself tea. Hands trembling when she looked out the window, she saw Damien in the distance, walking toward the forest behind the stables, his figure tall, dark, his coat billowing with each gust of wind. She thought about following him, but the image of the locked west wing door returned like a magnet, pulling her back. The house was quiet, too quiet. She walked through the library, the scent of old pages and smoke filling the air. Her fingers brushed along the spines of books until she stopped at a shelf half open behind it. A faint draft brushed her face. She pushed the shelf gently and it shifted, revealing a narrow, hidden corridor. Her breath caught. She stepped inside, the air colder, damper, the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deep within. She followed the corridor until she reached a small wooden door. The smell of metal and candle wax filled her nose. She pressed her ear to it. Silence. Then a faint sobbing. Her stomach twisted. She whispered hello, but there was no answer when she tried the handle. It didn't move. Locked. She took a shaky step back, her heart racing. She wanted to run, but something inside her refused to turn away. She had to know. A creak behind her made her spin around. Damien stood at the other end of the corridor, his face in shadow, his voice low and sharp. "What are you doing here?" His eyes burned with fury, or fear, she couldn't tell. "I got lost," she lied, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. He walked toward her slowly, the air between them tense, dangerous. "Lost," he repeated, his tone colder than the stone walls. "I told you never to come near this part of the house. I heard something," she blurted out. "I thought someone was hurt." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes darted to the locked door, then back to her. "Whatever you think you heard, forget it," he said in a voice that sounded more like a plea than an order. "You don't understand what's inside that room. You never will." He took her arm, guiding her back through the corridor, his grip firm but not cruel. When they reached the library, he released her, breathing hard, his voice lower, softer. "Don't ever go there again, Isabella. Some doors are locked for a reason." She wanted to ask why, but something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pain, deep, hollow pain that seemed to swallow him whole before she could speak. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing until they vanished into silence. That night she couldn't sleep again. The fog had thickened outside, the wind howled through the trees. Suddenly, the faint sound of a door creaking reached her ears. She froze. The sound came again from the hall. She opened her door and peered out. The candlelight from her room stretched down the corridor, revealing faint, wet footprints leading away from her door, straight toward the west wing. Her pulse quickened. The footprints were small, too small to be Damien's, and they were fresh water dripping from each step. Vanishing into the darkness, she followed them slowly, heart-pounding. When she reached the corner, she stopped at the sight of a woman's figure standing at the far end, pale hair falling over her shoulders, wearing a white nightgown torn at the hem. The woman turned her head slightly and whispered a single word: "Run." Then the light flickered, and she was gone. The next morning, the air felt different, heavier, like the house itself had woken up after a long sleep. Isabella couldn't tell if what she saw last night was real. The woman in the white gown, the whispered word, "Run." Her mind replayed it over and over. She tried to convince herself it was a dream, but when she opened her door, the floorboards were still damp. Faint prints smeared across the wood, disappearing toward the west wing. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. The servants moved nervously, their eyes shifting toward her, then away as if afraid to meet her gaze. The cook crossed herself quietly when Isabella entered the kitchen. Mr. Hale appeared moments later, holding a letter sealed with dark wax. He placed it gently on the table. "This came for the master," he said, then hesitated, his voice lower. "Miss Cross, if you value your peace of mind, stay clear of that part of the house. Curiosity has destroyed better people than you." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" But he only bowed slightly and left. Damien didn't appear at breakfast. She waited an hour, then decided to find him herself. She walked out into the gardens. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the old stone fountain covered in moss. The sound of hooves came from the distance. She followed it to the stable. Damien was there, shirt sleeves rolled up, working with a young stallion, his movements calm, strong, controlled. He noticed her instantly, his eyes darkening. "What are you doing out here?" "I was worried." She said, "You didn't come to breakfast." He wiped his hands on a rag, his tone flat. "I don't need to eat with strangers." She flinched. At the word strangers, he saw it and sighed softer this time. "I'm not used to company. You shouldn't take it personally." He turned to the horse again, speaking more to himself than to her. "You should be far away from this place. It's not meant for someone like you, someone like me," she asked, quiet, innocent. He looked at her, then long enough for her to feel the weight of it. "Pure," he said softly, like he hated the word. Before she could respond, thunder rumbled across the hills, dark clouds crawling toward the mansion. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. They started back to the house, but as they reached the steps, Isabella froze at the sight of a figure standing at one of the upstairs windows. A woman, pale, her hair blowing in the wind, her hand pressed to the glass. Damien followed her gaze, his face drained of color. "Get inside now," he ordered, grabbing her arm. The door slammed behind them as the first drops of rain fell. The storm broke within minutes, rain hammering against the roof, lightning flashing across the hallways. Damien paced near the fire, his movements restless, his jaw tight. Isabella sat on the edge of the couch, her heart racing. "What did you see?" she asked finally. He stopped and looked at her. Nothing, he said too quickly. She stood. Don't lie to me, I saw her. She was there. Who was she? Damien walked toward her, his face pale and drawn. Forget what you saw, Isabella. You don't know what you're talking about. I do, she insisted, her voice trembling. I saw a woman upstairs. I saw her last night too. She told me to run. His expression changed, something dark and desperate flickering in his eyes. You went near the west wing, didn't you? He asked, low, deadly quiet. She hesitated. I heard crying. I thought someone was hurt. His hand hit the wall beside her, not in violence, but in frustration. The sound made her jump. He looked away, breathing hard, his voice raw. She's not supposed to leave that room. The words hung in the air like thunder. Isabella stared at him, confused. Who? She whispered. Damien didn't answer, his hands shaking slightly. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the storm, his reflection flickering in the lightning. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, like something breaking inside. Her name is Margaret, he said, barely audible, and then softer, as if afraid of his own words. My wife, Isabella, felt the floor tilt beneath her. His wife, the woman everyone said was dead alive, hidden behind that locked door. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and somewhere far above them, from the west wing, came the faint sound of a woman laughing, low and broken, echoing through the storm. The storm raged all through the night, thunder shaking the walls, lightning flashing through the windows like white fire. Isabella lay awake, unable to stop hearing that laughter echoing from the west wing. The sound didn't belong to a ghost. It was too human, too real. Every strike of thunder seemed to bring it closer until she could almost feel the breath of the woman who made it. By morning, the storm had passed, but the air inside the house still crackled with tension. The servants moved quietly, avoiding Isabella's eyes. She could see fear etched into their faces, as if they too had heard what she had. Only, they had learned to pretend they hadn't. When she entered the dining room, Damien was there, his back turned to her, staring into the dying fire. The morning light painted his face in soft gold, but his eyes looked darker than ever. He didn't speak for a long time, and neither did she. Finally, he said, You weren't supposed to know, Isabella. You weren't supposed to see any of it. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. Why is she here, Damien? Why would you keep her locked away? His jaw tightened. He rubbed a hand over his face as if trying to wipe the question from existence. Because I made a promise, he said, his voice rough, low. I promised her I wouldn't let the world see what she became. Isabella took a step closer, but you told everyone she was dying. Why would you lie? His eyes lifted to hers, sharp, full of something she couldn't name, because the truth would have destroyed what little was left of me, he said. You think she's a victim, but you don't know what she did. His words hung between them like the smoke from the dying fire. She wanted to ask what he meant, but he turned away, ending the conversation with silence. Later that day, she wandered through the garden, hoping the cold air would calm her thoughts. The wild roses had begun to bloom again, thorns glistening with morning dew. She bent to pick one, but a voice startled her. Don't touch them. She turned quickly. Damien stood a few feet behind her, the wind pushing his dark hair across his face. They're her flowers, he said quietly. Margaret planted them the summer before she changed. His tone made the word change sound like a curse. What happened to her? Isabella asked softly. Damien's eyes drifted to the ground. She wanted something I couldn't give, he said. Power control. She wanted the estate, the fortune. She thought I was weak. He paused, and when I refused, she tried to kill herself. She set the fire. That night I saved her, but she didn't come back the same. Something broke inside her, and I couldn't fix it. The words cut deep through the calm air, Isabella's voice barely above a whisper. So you keep her here, locked away like a prisoner. His gaze hardened. It's not a prison, he said. It's protection for her, for everyone else. She has moments when she remembers, but they don't last long. She forgets who I am, who she is. She becomes someone else. Before Isabella could speak, a sound drifted from the house, a faint scream, sharp and desperate. Damien froze for a heartbeat, then ran back inside. Isabella followed, her heart pounding. The scream echoed down the corridor from the west wing. By the time they reached the door, Damien was already unlocking it. He slipped inside, shouting, "Margaret, stop this, Isabelle." Ela hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit, candles burning low against the walls. Margaret stood. In the center, her hair wild, her eyes glassy. In one hand she held a piece of broken mirror, blood dripping from her fingers. Damien approached her slowly, calm, steady. "Give it to me, Margaret. Please." She laughed softly, her voice cracked and hollow. "You replaced me," she said, and pointed toward the doorway where Isabella stood watching you, "brought her here to erase me." Isabella's breath caught. Damien turned sharply, his voice shaking. "No, that's not true." But Margaret stepped closer, the shard flashing in the candlelight. She moved fast, faster than either of them expected. Damien grabbed her arm, the mirror cutting into his hand. Blood spilled across her wrist, and she froze, staring at it, as if waking from a dream. Then she began to cry, a sound so broken it filled the room. Isabella stood frozen as Damien pulled the mirror from her hand, wrapping his own around her trembling fingers. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe," she whispered back. "I saw her," Margaret said, her voice thin. "I saw her walking through my house. She looks like me." Damien looked at Isabella, his eyes full of guilt and exhaustion. "Get out," he said softly but firmly. "Isabella, go now." She backed away, the door closing slowly behind her as the sound of Margaret's crying faded into silence. That night Isabella sat by her window, unable to stop shaking. She had seen the madness in Margaret's eyes and the love still buried in Damien's. He was caught between both worlds, the past and the present, and she had just stepped into the center of his storm. Yet even with everything she had seen, one thought refused to leave her mind. She didn't believe Margaret was wrong. She did look like her. The next day dawned clear, but the house felt darker than before. The servants moved like ghosts, their faces pale, their voices hushed as if afraid that a single word might wake the storm again. Isabella tried to shake the memory of what she had seen in that locked room, but the image of Margaret, her wild eyes, her trembling hands haunted her. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Damien had held her, how his voice softened when he said her name. At breakfast, the seat at the head of the table was empty. Damien had vanished, leaving only a note written in sharp handwriting. "Don't leave the house." She folded it and slipped it into her pocket. The silence around her was unbearable, the ticking clock, the drip of rainwater from the roof. Everything reminded her that she was trapped. By noon, the loneliness became too heavy. She wandered into the library. The scent of smoke and old leather still lingered. She tried reading, but her eyes kept drifting to the hidden corridor behind the bookshelf, the one that led to the west wing. She promised herself she wouldn't go back, but the thought clawed at her. She needed answers. Who was Margaret? Before the madness, what really happened between them? The decision came like a whisper before she could stop herself. She was already pushing the bookshelf aside. The corridor was darker this time, the air thick with the smell of candle wax and iron. She crept forward until she reached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle. It was unlocked. Inside the room, candles flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The bed was empty, the sheets twisted as if someone had struggled. There was no sign of Margaret. The sound of dripping water came from the corner. She turned and froze. A mirror stood there, cracked down the middle. A message scratched into the surface in blood-red letters. "She's not dead." Isabella stumbled back, her breath catching the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, heavy, slow, deliberate. She turned just as Damien appeared, his face unreadable, his hand wrapped in a fresh bandage. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous. "I came to see if she was safe," she answered, trembling. "But she's gone." Damien looked past his jaw tightening. "She does this sometimes," he said, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "She wanders. She always comes back." "Where does she go?" Isabella asked. His eyes flicked toward her, then away, the woods sometimes, the attic sometimes. "Nowhere. She shouldn't exist, but she does." His voice broke for the first time, and she felt something raw in him, guilt, fear, and something deeper. He whispered, "She wasn't always like this. She used to laugh. She used to love me." He walked to the mirror, staring at the cracked reflection. His face split between the two halves. "She's not dead," he repeated softly. "Not in the way you think, but she's not alive either." Before Isabella could ask what he meant, a scream tore through the air, sharp and close. It came from upstairs. They ran, the noise growing louder, a mix of rage and sorrow, the sound of shattering glass. When they reached the landing, they saw her Margaret standing at the top of the staircase, her nightgown torn, her hair wild, her eyes burning with something beyond madness. She held a long silver object in her hand, a letter opener glinting in the light. "You lied!" she screamed at Damien. "You brought her here to replace me?" Damien took a step forward, his voice calm and low. Margaret put it down. "Please." She laughed, a hollow sound, and turned the blade toward her own throat. "No!" Damien shouted, rushing forward. He grabbed her wrist, the blade falling to the floor. Margaret struggled, kicking, clawing, screaming words that made no sense. Isabella stood frozen, tears filling her eyes as Damien finally pinned her arms, whispering, "Please stop, please, I can't lose you again." The fight drained out of Margaret, her body shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Isabella, her expression suddenly soft like a frightened child. "He still dreams of me," she whispered, and then she smiled, a small broken smile, before closing her eyes, collapsing against Damien's chest unconscious. He held her for a long moment, his face buried in her hair. When he finally looked up at Isabella, his eyes were full of something she didn't expect. Not anger, not guilt, but despair. "Now you see," he said quietly. "This is my life. This is what you walked into." Isabella wanted to speak, but no words came. All she could do was nod and watch as he carried Margaret away, disappearing into the shadows of the West Wing. That night, as Isabella lay in bed, she could still hear echoes of that scream. The house moaned with the wind, and somewhere far away, a woman's voice began to hum the lullaby again. But this time, another voice joined her, deeper, lower, painful. Damien's voice singing the same melody, like two souls trapped in the same curse. The next morning, the mansion felt empty, but not peaceful. Every hallway seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. The echo of footsteps that weren't hers followed Isabella as she walked toward the garden. The roses were blooming wild, now red petals spilling across the path like drops of blood. The storm had passed, yet the air still carried its weight. She couldn't stop thinking about the night before, the way Damien had held Margaret, the way he had looked at her like a man already half buried alive. She found him near the stables, standing beside the black horse, the one she had helped him saddle days ago. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands stained with dirt and blood from a fresh cut. He didn't look up when she approached. His voice was quiet, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "She's sleeping now. The doctor came." He gave her something to keep her calm. Isabella hesitated, wanting to say something but not knowing what. Damien turned, finally, his eyes darker than the sky before rain. "She looked like you when I first saw you," he said. And for a moment Isabella thought he meant it as a kindness, but his voice cracked on the words. "She made me believe I was safe. She made me forget what I was until she tried to end it all." "What happened that night?" she asked softly. Damien's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting toward the forest. "She lost the baby." He said the words slow, heavy. "I found her in the fire. She started it herself. She thought it would burn away her pain, but it only burned what little love we had left. She survived, but she never came back." He looked at his hand, the one that had saved her from the flames, now scarred and shaking. "I told the world she died because it was easier than telling them the truth." Isabella stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair. "And now," she said, "you hide her to protect her, or to protect yourself." His eyes snapped to hers, and for a heartbeat the cold in them vanished, replaced by something raw. "I don't know anymore," he whispered. As the day faded, she returned to her room, but her heart refused to rest. The house felt restless too. Floorboards creaked, voices carried through the vents. At first it sounded like whispers, then clearer laughter, soft and low, followed by the faint sound of footsteps above her. She rose slowly, lighting a candle. The flame flickered wild in her shaking hand. The sound came again, this time from the hall outside. She opened her door. The corridor was empty, but the air smelled faintly of smoke. She followed it down the hallway, the scent growing stronger with every step. It led her to the West Wing. The door was slightly open, a soft glow spilling through the crack. She pushed it gently inside the room. The bed was empty. Margaret was gone again. A chill slid down her spine. She turned to leave, but a shadow moved in the corner. Damien stepped out from the darkness, his face pale, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice was tired, not angry. She shook her head. I had to see. I can't keep pretending I don't know what's happening here. For a long time he said nothing, just watched her as if trying to decide whether to push her away or pull her closer. Then he moved toward her, slowly, his hand reaching out to touch her face, his fingers trembling. I don't know why I let you stay, he whispered. Maybe I wanted to believe I could feel something again. Maybe I wanted to be forgiven. Isabella's breath caught her heart thundering in her chest before she could speak. He leaned in, his lips brushed hers, a fleeting, desperate kiss that tasted of pain and rain, and something she didn't yet understand. But before either could breathe, a sound shattered the moment, a scream from outside, high and piercing, the kind that splits the night in two. They ran down the corridor, the sound coming from the lower hall. Smoke filled the air, thick and black. Flames licked the curtains, spreading fast. Damien grabbed her arm, pulling her back. The West Wing. It's burning, he shouted through the smoke. Isabella covered her mouth, coughing. Margaret. She gasped. He turned toward the fire, his face pale. She's still inside. Without another word, he ran into the smoke, disappearing into the heat. Isabella screamed his name, but he didn't turn back. The sound of cracking wood filled the air. The fire roared, swallowing everything in its path. She could see his shadow in the flames, fighting through the smoke, dragging someone's body out of the darkness. He stumbled forward, carrying Margaret limp and silent in his arms. Isabella ran to them, helping him lay her down on the floor. Damien's face streaked with soot and tears. He pressed his hand to Margaret's chest. No pulse, he whispered, his voice breaking. She's gone for real this time. The flames reflected in his eyes, and Isabella realized the fire that destroyed the West Wing wasn't just burning the house. It was burning the last piece of the man he used to be. The night of the fire would never leave her mind. The air still smelled of smoke. The walls were blackened with ash, and silence had become the loudest sound in the mansion. Isabella sat beside Damien in the great hall, the fire now cold and gray. Margaret's body lay in the east chamber, covered with a white sheet. The doctor had come and gone, leaving behind words that felt heavy and final, accidental smoke inhalation. But Isabella knew nothing about this house was ever accidental. Damien hadn't spoken since it happened. His eyes were fixed on the flames that no longer burned his hands, still shaking from the burns he tried to hide. She wanted to reach for him, but something in his stillness warned her to stay quiet. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spoke. She wanted freedom, he said, barely a whisper. She found it in the fire. She found it her way. Isabella's heart twisted. You saved her from that once. He looked at her slowly, his voice breaking. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe she was meant to go that night, and I stole her peace. His eyes lifted to hers, full of grief, but behind it was something else. Fear. 2 days passed. The servants cleaned the ashes. The doctor sent papers to the village. The mansion began to breathe again, but Isabella couldn't sleep. Every night, she woke to the faint smell of smoke, the echo of footsteps in the burned corridor. And once she swore she saw a figure standing outside her window, pale against the moonlight. On the 3rd night, she heard the sound of glass breaking. She grabbed her candle and opened the door. The hallway was dark, the air colder than it should be. She followed the noise down to the West Wing, now sealed off with boards. The faint light from her candle flickered across the wall, revealing words carved into the soot. They shimmered faintly as if written by fire. She's still here. Her blood froze. She stepped closer, touching the letters. They were warm. She stumbled back, the candle trembling in her hand. She turned to run straight into Damien, his eyes hollow but awake. What are you doing here? She whispered. The same question came from his mouth, but his voice sounded lost. I heard her, he said. I heard her voice again. Isabella, you don't understand. It doesn't end with fire. She's not gone. Before she could answer, another sound echoed through the hall, the piano in the music room playing a slow, haunting melody. Damien turned his head sharply, his face drained of color. Margaret used to play that song, he whispered. They ran toward the sound. The piano stopped. The door creaked open by itself, the room empty except for dust and shadows, the keys still moving faintly on their own as if touched by invisible hands. Isabella stepped forward slowly, her breath shallow, and then she saw it on the piano, a locket blackened by smoke. She opened it. Inside was a photo of Damien and Margaret smiling. Before everything turned dark, she looked up and saw movement in the mirror across the room. Not her reflection, not Damien, but a woman's face, pale, her eyes dark with sorrow. The image flickered, then vanished. Damien stepped forward, shattering the mirror with his hand, the glass cutting his palm. He didn't even flinch. "It's her," he said, his voice shaking. "She won't let go." Isabella grabbed his hand, trying to stop the bleeding. "Damien, listen to me. She's gone. This is the house. It's playing tricks on you." But he pulled away, his voice breaking. "You don't hear her. You don't feel her. She's still here. She wants me to pay." That night the wind howled through the broken windows and rain fell again, like the night she first arrived. Isabella lay awake, hearing whispers in the walls. Her candle burned low, flickering, then dying out. When the room went dark, she felt something cold brush against her skin. A soft voice barely above a breath. "She took my life, now I'll take his." She bolted upright, but the room was empty. Her heart pounded. She ran through the hall searching for Damien. His door was open, the bed empty, his coat gone. She rushed outside into the storm. Lightning flashed across the garden, and there he was, walking barefoot into the rain, heading toward the ruins of the West Wing. She screamed his name, but he didn't stop. She followed him, the mud sucking at her feet, the fire's remains steaming in the downpour. He stood at the center of the ruins, staring. Into the charred floorboards, his voice cracked and broken. "You can have me," he said. "I took your life now. Take mine." Isabella reached him, grabbing his arm, pulling him back. "Damien, stop. Please, you didn't kill her. She killed herself. The truth won't bring her peace. It will only take you too." He turned to her, his face wet with rain and tears. "Then why can't she leave me?" he whispered. "Because you won't let her," she said, and before he could respond, the ground beneath them shifted, the burned wood collapsing with a roar. Damien pushed her aside as the floor gave way. When the smoke cleared, the ruins were silent again. Isabella crawled forward, coughing, calling his name. There was no answer, only the rain and the faint whisper that drifted through the air, soft, almost tender, the lullaby again. But this time, it wasn't Margaret's voice. It was Damien's singing from somewhere below the ruins, alive but fading into the darkness. The rain kept falling through the night, turning the ruins of the West Wing into a river of ash and mud. Isabella crawled toward the hole where Damien had vanished. Her hands scraped raw by the charred wood. She called his name again and again, her voice breaking each time until at last a faint sound came from below. Not words, only a groan. She grabbed a fallen beam and used it to climb down into the darkness. The air was thick with smoke and heat. The glow of dying embers lit the space beneath the mansion. It was an old cellar, filled with stone pillars and broken wine barrels. Water dripped from the ceiling, hissing against the embers in the center. Damien lay half buried under a fallen beam, his shirt torn, his face streaked with blood, but he was alive. She stumbled to him, her breath trembling. "Damien," she whispered, "stay with me." His eyes flickered open, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen since the day they met. Warmth, faint, but real. His hand reached for hers, and he managed a small smile. "I thought it would end with fire," he said. "But then you came." She tried to lift the beam, but it wouldn't move. The smoke thickened around them, her lungs burning. "You have to leave," he said, his voice weak. "The roof will fall." "I'm not leaving," she cried. "Not again. Not like this." The ground shook. Another part of the house, collapsing above them, dust rained from the ceiling, and in that moment she saw it. Something gleaming half buried in the dirt, the locket, the same one from the piano. She picked it up, the chain broken, the photo inside blackened, but still visible. Margaret's smile frozen in time as if mocking them both. Damien's eyes followed it, and a tear slipped down his cheek. "She wanted to destroy everything," he whispered. "The fire was never for me. It was for her. She couldn't bear to see me love again." The words hit Isabella like lightning. She stared at him confused. Love again. He met her eyes, and there it was, the truth that had been growing between them since the first night she arrived. The truth he had tried to bury with his guilt. "I didn't know how to feel anymore," he said, "until you walked through that door." The roof above them groaned louder, the floor cracking beneath her. She pressed both hands to the beam one final time, her body shaking. She pushed with everything she had, and somehow the beam rolled free. Damien gasped in pain, but sat up, coughing. She helped him to his feet. Together, they stumbled toward the staircase, leading back to the hall. The air filled with sparks, the walls burning behind them. They collapsed in the foyer just as the last of the West Wing fell into itself. Flames leaping into the sky, the servants rushed toward them shouting for water and blankets, but Isabella only heard the pounding of Damien's heart beneath her hand, a live, steady human. By morning the fire was out, the mansion half destroyed but still standing. Damien stood by the garden, his arm in a sling, staring at the rising sun. The air smelled of rain and roses, the last of the wild blooms untouched by the flames. Isabella joined him, her face pale but calm. She handed him the locket, the metal still warm from the fire. "It's over now," she said softly. He looked at it for a long time, then dropped it into the pond, the ripples spreading until it disappeared forever. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." He turned to her, his voice low. "I thought I was cursed to live in darkness, but you showed me light. You showed me that love isn't what destroys, it's what survives." She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away. His hand closed around hers, rough and scarred but gentle, the way a man touches something he never thought he deserved. She smiled faintly, the storm clouds finally breaking, sunlight spilling over them like gold. Weeks passed. The ruins of the West Wing were cleared, leaving an open space where grass began to grow. Damien sold the remaining shares of his company and began rebuilding the estate, not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary. A place for people lost between love and grief to start again. On the day the new foundation was laid, he took Isabella's hand and led her to the garden where the wild roses still grew. He looked down at her and said, "I once thought fire destroyed everything, but it only burns what needs to end." She met his gaze and whispered, "Then let what's left be love." He kissed her there in the morning light, a kiss that didn't taste of sorrow or fear, but of hope, of something clean and new. The kind of love that grows from ashes, not despite the pain, but because of it. As the wind moved through the trees and the last smoke faded from the horizon, the mansion no longer felt haunted. It breathed again, alive, reborn, and at peace. In that silence, one coup, he'd almost hear a soft voice carried by the wind, not angry, not broken, only free. And with that, the story of the virgin wife and the bitter widower came to an end, not with fire or death, but with forgiveness, the kind that burns quietly inside the heart and keeps it warm forever.